Well, hopefully as you were walking in, someone handed you a bulletin, and you can go ahead and grab that and open it up. We've got some notes for today's sermon, most of which we'll actually talk about. And there's also just a list in there of all the things we have going on. A couple of things I want to highlight. First off is we've got Rodeo Week coming up. Rodeo Week coming up here. I'm the only person that's supposed to be surprised by that. You guys should know about Rodeo Week, right?
We feed them.
Yeah, so we're feeding the cowboys. And I'm suspecting that these guys can eat.
Yes.
Tomorrow night, we'll be out there feeding the cowboys. The different churches take this on every night, and tomorrow's our night. And so we need your help. We need people to help set up, serve food, and tear down. Tomorrow night, they'll be meeting at 5:30 to start setting up. And the event, they'll start serving anywhere from 6 o'clock or so, and the event kind of goes till 9. So if you can show up for any part of that and help us serve these guys, it's a great opportunity. And not to mention, you'll just have a good time. I mean, the most quality people are going to be involved here. And I'm not talking just about the Cowboys. I'm talking about the CTK crew that's going to be there. So if you're willing to help out, that would be great. If you want to help out and you can't be there, it costs us about $500 to feed these guys. So you're welcome to contribute to that if you like. You can put that in your offering in those boxes on your way out. Also, if you're visiting us today, I just want to throw this out there. We've got these little white cards, and we would love you just to tell us a little bit about yourself so that we can connect with you and see how we can serve you best. Also, coming up in September, we have a Women of Christ conference. We're taking signups for that in the lobby, and that's going to be fantastic. We've got several amazing speakers involved, and a lot of work's been going into that. Also, we've got a leukemia swab drive coming up on the 28th. And basically what's going to happen is we're going to have a table out here, and if you're willing, you can have them just real quick. They'll swab the inside of your cheek. You fill out, a little questionnaire, and they'll be able to tell you what your blood type is and whether or not you're a candidate to be able to donate blood to people who desperately need those transfusions when they're dealing with things like leukemia. So if that's something you're interested in, show up on the 28th ready to get swabbed in the mouth. I don't know what else to say about that. I didn't make it sound very attractive, did I? Sorry. Also today, right after this service, we have our new attendees lunch. If you've been kind of visiting or you think we might not recognize you and you've been around for a long time, come next door and we'll serve you lunch. We just want to tell you a little bit about our church, where we come from, where we're headed, and get to know you a little bit so that, again, we can know each other here. So all that's in the bulletin. If you have any questions or anything, you can refer there or talk to somebody afterwards. Let me open us in prayer. Father, again, we come before you and we just linger together in your presence. We just long to see your face. We long to interact with you and worship you. And we want you to be pleased with our worship. We know you are, that we know that we are enough for you. And we just celebrate that this morning. I pray, God, that you'd speak in and through us. Amen. So today, actually, before I get too far into this, how many of you are seeing me for the first time today? Okay, only a few people that are kind of confused because I'm not Rick Snodgrass, and he's still the pastor, and he'll be back next week. So, hopefully we won't do too much damage today. But my name is Chip. I'm the new associate pastor here, and I'm excited to be able to teach you this morning and to be on board with Rick and our CTK staff team. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a couple of things that I've been kind of mulling over as I try to figure out my place and my job here at CTK Nampa. And you'll find out eventually that that's one of my favorite ways to teach, really, is to kind of talk about what I'm learning as we're teaching it. And for me, that just helps keep me engaged and entertained while we're doing it. And I hope that in that way we can sort of walk together through some some of these concepts. I also think what we're talking about today is ultimately going to land on the application side of what we've been talking about at large lately, which is about soul care. We've been talking for many weeks on this idea of what it looks like to tend to your soul. Ultimately, what does it look like to love God with your soul and to take care of it and to deal with yourself on a soul level? So 10 years ago, my wife and I and our kids moved to Durango, Colorado. And when we pulled into town, I had no idea that I would have the awesome and unexpected opportunity to attend one of the most prestigious institutions of relational church leadership this side of the Mississippi, maybe the country or even the world. The name of such an amazing institution would be called the University of Durango Cyclery. I'm going to throw a few pictures up here and you can kind of see the campus as well as some of the esteemed faculty of Durango Cyclery Bike Shop. I mean, the University of Durango Cyclery. If you look close, you can kind of see this building is, this is actually the house where the actor who played Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies grew up. Yeah. I don't know which is his room, but he came and told us all about it one day, and so we believe him. But this is Durango Cyclery, one of the most amazing bike shops in the world, if you ask me. This is where culture shock hits me coming to Nampa, a town of 80,000 people with 2 bike shops. Durango Cyclery in a town of 16,000 is one of like 8 bike shops. This happens to be the oldest and first dedicated bicycle shop in Durango, founded in 1982. It's interesting that what I thought was going to be a simple side job, working with some friends at a bike shop, turned out to be the education of a lifetime for me. And the reason is that Durango Cyclery is a lot more than a business. It is actually a family. One of my favorite memories with these guys was a couple of years ago when our shop was invited by one of the bicycle companies that we sell there to attend a camp out put on by Surly Bicycles. And they paid for the sites and they had food and all this stuff. And we got 6 of us from the shop got to go. And we got to drive down to Denver or up to Denver and participate in this thing. And the camp out was great, complete with fire jumping on demo bikes and bottle rocket fights till the wee hours in the morning. But for me, the best part of this experience with this crew was getting there. Usually it takes about 6.5 hours to get to Denver from Durango, and today it took us 12. Apparently it takes a lot longer to get somewhere when you stop to ride your bikes down every single mountain pass. When you ask questions like, how far do you think you can get your bike up that emergency truck ramp? I've literally spent hours in that shop, sitting on the bar stools around the counter, long after the shop is closed, laughing and telling stories. Let me introduce you to some of the faculty, and I don't have all their individual pictures up here, but I'll just tell you about some of the characters involved here in Durango Cyclery. First, I got to tell you about Richard Elliott. Rick Elliott is the founder and curator of the University of Durango Cyclery. He started shop in 1982, and the way he puts it, in 1982, all you had to do was open the doors and you could sell bikes. It was the infancy of mountain biking, and in a town like Durango, everybody wanted a bike, and so he just was going gangbusters for years. Years later, he would sell the shop to Russell, an employee who we'll talk about later, but Rick still works at the shop as a mechanic. Rick taught me to carve out time and resources for the things that matter more than anything. Rick is also an amazing model. He could essentially be a professor on a profound truth, and that is that the heart of a good father is always looking to raise other people up. We're talking about a guy that can't show you how to change a bicycle tire without teaching you something about life and how to better yours. Rick always meets you as an equal, even though it becomes quickly apparent after a few minutes that this guy has forgotten more about bicycles than we may ever know. Another person on the faculty, I'll call him the Dean of Students, would be Garrett Alexander. We often refer to Garrett as Garryoke. because he refuses to stop singing all day long, loud, sometimes obnoxiously. But Garrett, being the dean of students, is the embodiment of generosity. He basically is the idea that every single person matters, whoever walks into the shop. And Garrett has a lot to teach as well about this idea that love expressed is love received. That you have to actually show people that you love them, not just hope they know. Once you're accepted into the inner circle of the Durango Cyclery, you can't walk in the doors without getting a long, gratuitous, sometimes awkward hug from Garrett in front of customers while they're trying to get help. And I definitely couldn't talk about Durango Cyclery without bringing up a guy named John Bailey. Maybe Bailey would be the chancellor of our university. John is one of the most talented people I've ever met in my life. Maybe you've met someone like this. It doesn't seem to matter if he's drawing a picture, playing the drums in a band, or riding a bike. He just makes everything look easy. No one's ever said that about me. And John just has a way of bringing art to anything that he's involved in. Bailey also wrote the entire curriculum for this university on grace, especially what it means treating the most undesirable people with dignity and patience. Russell and John told me a story once, and they were actually telling me the story because they were telling me how glad they were that I wasn't there because of what a protective jerk I tend to be about the bike shop. But one of the main sources and foundations of this business is that we recycle bikes. People donate their old bikes, sometimes junk, sometimes really cool stuff, and we take all the parts and we strip them down and pull them together, and we recycle the bikes and restore them, and then we sell them again on the shop for whatever it cost us in parts and labor. And so we have a lot of cool bikes, and there's some frames and bikes there with some real history. And I remember them telling me about one in particular that had been hanging up in the rafters in the patio next to the shop, and it had been stolen. And this particular frame, John noticed immediately because he had plans for it. He'd been thinking about how he was going to build it up, and it wasn't there. And he and Russell were sitting on the bench outside of the shop when this dirty, gangly, shifty-looking guy with no shoes on came riding up the alley on the stolen frame. And this is the part where they were glad I wasn't there to push him down and take the bicycle away from him. Instead, they watched, and John, in only the way he can, pulled the guy aside, told him that he recognized the frame, brought him inside, helped him find a different frame, and then stood with him at the stand and helped him build a bike of his own so that the barefoot bandit could ride off on his own bike at the end of the day. So much that I know about grace and patience and not just being a violent jerk, I learned from John. We never just sold bikes at Durango Cyclery. We did life together. We got on each other's nerves, we laughed and cried and teased each other mercilessly and shared adventures. I just had no idea when I showed up in that town that a bike shop in the little corner of southwestern Colorado would school me in what it looks like to be fully accepted, to know and be fully known in such an unlikely family, a soul family, if you will. It's interesting to me that Jesus shows us what it looks like to live in a soul family. Jesus, who never married, rarely even talked about it, and whose disciples were all either single or had left their families to be with him, gave us a glimpse of what it looks like to live in a family where the bonded connection that we share happens at a soul level. In our current cultural landscape where the very definition of family is being questioned, it's interesting to me that Jesus demonstrates a way of living in community that we often miss. I think sometimes we're so obsessed with what Jesus said and what he taught and how we can come up with the rules to live by from that we miss a beautiful story of how he actually lived. Look at Matthew chapter 12. Verse 46 says, as Jesus was speaking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside, asking to speak with him. And someone told Jesus, your mother and brothers are outside, and they want to speak with you. And Jesus asked, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? And then he pointed to his disciples, and he said, look, these are my mother and brothers. Now, we got to be careful how we read this stuff. It's kind of like when you get a text message and you're trying to figure out the tone of voice, because my immediate thought when I read this is he kind of sounds like an angry teenager. Mom, I'm here with my friends. You guys are all acting like you've never done that before. That's okay. I don't think that's what's going on here, though. I don't think Jesus is having some sort of adolescent tantrum here and rejecting his mother and his siblings. I think what's going on is Jesus is illustrating in the most subtle way, or it was obvious in this moment, that his disciples, this group of men and women who were with him, doing life together with him, were his family. They weren't his employees. They weren't his neighbors. They weren't his city softball league team. These were his family. And without rejecting his mom, although I can't imagine how she might have received that, here's a moment where he says, look, these are my brothers and sisters. This is my family. Something similar happens in Jesus' last moments before he's crucified. If you look in Luke chapter 22, we commonly look at this passage of Scripture when we're talking about communion. Verse 14, when the time came, Jesus and his apostles sat down together at the table. And Jesus said, I have been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. You see, if we're in too much of a rush to figure out all the logistics of taking communion together and how often, and should we have real wine or juice, or do we all, I love how here we all break the bread together and just makes that sound. And we're all, if we're so worried about figuring out all the logistics around this, or what's our theology or doctrine of communion, we miss what I think is the most beautiful moment that we ever see between Jesus and his disciples. And it illuminates for me so much of all of their other interactions. They sit down, it's time to celebrate Passover, and Jesus knows what is about to happen. The disciples haven't quite clued in yet, and all he can think to say is, I have just been waiting for this moment before everything goes down, to be with you guys. Here's Jesus, the Son of God, fully man, about to be crucified to do what he came for. And as they sit down to this meal, he just says, man, you guys, I'm so glad I get to sit with you one last time before all this happens. These guys were not just a team. There was something familial going on there. Jesus and his disciples had a mission, for sure. However, their relationship was about so much more than the task at hand. So much so that sometimes the disciples didn't seem to quite get what the task at hand was. I mean, we often find them kind of confused about, wait, where are we going? What are we doing? Like, you're going where? They would have these questions. And even that, to me, begets the amazing relationship and the depth of relationship there. Because if we're not careful, we might read some of the things the disciples say and think they were kind of stupid. Why would they ask such dumb questions? Why would they ask Jesus who could be sitting next to him in his right hand in the kingdom when all this was said and done? Well, either they were total arrogant jerks, or maybe they were just such good family. Maybe there was a soul family thing going on here, where as they were living and doing life together, they could ask whatever was on their heart. Even if it was a question like, can I sit at your right hand in your kingdom? They didn't have to be afraid or phrase their questions right for fear that Jesus might go off on them. Even though he did sometimes, which family does too. This fascinating little family of the Son of God and a small group of men and women who followed him every step of the way. They traveled, partied, mourned, got in trouble, and did life together. Their connection, their bond was so profound and just as important, I would argue, as their mission. They knew and were known at a soul level. And this kind of soul friendship only can happen when someone is willing to open themselves up to other people at the deeper layers beneath the mask that we choose to project to most of the people around us. If you read Richard Rohr, he calls it the false self. If you read my favorite author ever, Brennan Manning, he used to call it the imposter. Whatever you want to call it, there's a constructed self that we all have. The me that I think other people will accept while I hide my true self that I'm pretty sure no one could ever love. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's a combination of our coping mechanisms that start as we're children to our learned behaviors as we're growing up and we see what people respond to and what people laugh at and when they stop laughing. And we carefully and purposefully construct a persona that we imagine is what everyone around us wants to see. And we don't look confused about this in this room because if you've been to church much, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We imagine that we have to present like everything's fine. In Durango, at our church, we had a joke. If someone asked how you were doing, we'd always say, fine. Fine as fine can be. And how you said those words were really how you were doing. So sometimes it would be fine as could be. And then other times it would be like, fine. You know, and your kids sitting next to you rolling their eyes, and you know exactly how fine that morning went. Soul friendship requires that we look at, and that we present ourselves as a true self. One more character on the faculty at the University of Durango Cyclery that I just have to talk about would be Russell Zimmerman. Russell, in all his glory here, is probably one of the truest examples of a soul friend I have ever encountered in my life. It's hard for me to even talk about Russell. A couple of years ago, I got to go to the International Conference of CTK, and I got to lead a workshop. And the whole workshop was about how so often as Christians, we imagine that the rest of the world is missing this thing, and they just don't know how to love or how to have real relationships, and they can't possibly really be good people. And so the seminar I did was, what happens if you find out that your best friend is a better man than you are on all levels? What if your best friend you imagine is other or outside of Christianity? What if he turns out to love his wife better than you ever could? What if he is more connected with the universe and with nature and the things going on around him than you can muster? What if he leads you in things like grace and mercy and compassion? Russell's that guy for me. A soul friend if there ever was one. Years ago, Russell was an employee at Durango Cyclery, and he bought the shop from Rick Elliott. Rick continued working as a mechanic, and a few months ago, Russell sold the shop to another employee, and he's still working there. You get what I'm talking about family? Russell showed me that there's little room left for the imposter self when you make soul family your highest priority. Last week, Rick Snodgrass brought up David and Jonathan. in the Old Testament in 1 Samuel. And Jonathan was the son of Saul, Israel's king, and David was the young man who'd been anointed as the new king of Israel, on an awkward circumstance, to say the least. Saul and David had a tumultuous relationship, if you know. And Jonathan was Saul's son, and 1 Samuel describes the two of them meeting. And Rick talked about this last week. My favorite translation of the moment when these two guys came together says that Jonathan and David, as they came together and met each other, their souls were knit together from that moment. I think the way Rick read it last week is their souls became one. Here's two guys who came together, and they didn't just strike up a friendship. They certainly weren't responding to their circumstances, or they never would have had anything to do with each other to begin with. But something meshed in these guys and their whole lives. The only way to describe it would be to say that their souls were knit together. And that, I think, is the best way that I could describe a relationship with Russell Zimmerman. It's never seemed to matter if he was teasing me, crying with me over the pain of a hurting friend, or having an intervention to keep me from doing something really stupid, often, or belly laughing at his latest socially awkward situation. We are forever bonded on the deepest of levels. We confess our failures to each other, and we encourage each other to do what is right on all occasions. And we stand next to each other when we still choose to do what is wrong and suffer the consequences. I know that the Russell I see is the true and real one, and I also know that he has no time for anything but my truest self. And that soul friendship, a family of soul friends, always needs a guy like Russell to shape and nurture the family, which is exactly what he's done with Durango Cyclery. He accepts and embraces every single guy at the shop with all of their flaws and imperfections, while simultaneously not pretending that they don't exist. He's full of second and third chances, even to the point of sometimes being taken advantage of. And yet, the soul family always seems to win the day. And I got to tell you, there's something that I find most fascinating about this soul family experience that I had in Durango, at Durango Cyclery. Not one of those guys goes to church. If you ask them if they were Christians, I don't know what they'd say. You might get some really fascinating and interesting and colorful responses to that. They don't go to church. They work at a bike shop. Not that they're mutually exclusive. Here's a group of grown men who are willing to say, "I love you" out loud to each other, who are living in relationship with their true selves and experiencing a level of intimacy that has given me an entirely new perspective on family, and it's a bike shop. And it wasn't just the bike shop. I could tell you other stories about soul family experiences I had in Durango with an improv comedy group. You want to talk about a gathering around spontaneous, inappropriate jokes? Soul family. Or a team of people in a program at the high school working with self-harming and suicidal kids. The most intimate of soul family experiences. And it just makes me wonder and even crave a little bit the idea of what it would be like for our church, with the example that we have in Jesus himself, to learn to live as a whole community of soul families. Because here's the thing, is family is changing. Family is not what it used to be, and we have to get used to it. Marriages often end in divorce. Kids are growing up in mixed families and blended families and single-parent families. We don't have to approve of that, we're willing to accept it. We have to ask our kids, are you staying at his dad's house or his mom's house? That's just a reality of life now. Look at the media. Look at our popular culture. How in the world do we have a franchise of Fast and Furious movies? 7 movies long, and they're making number 8. What is the entire basis of these movies besides cars? Family. What does Dominic Toretto say in every single movie at some point? I don't have friends. I have family. We live in a world that is desperately trying to understand what family is. So many of us are looking around and saying, you know what I grew up in that was called family hurt me. How do I make sense of that? And so often in the church, instead of looking to figure out, like we do with our sin, at what is at the source of that, we just go straight to Scripture and we try to figure out how can we fight against it? How can we dig in our heels? How can we put the brakes on so that nothing ever changes? And here we've got Jesus Christ himself walking around with a group of disciples and creating a completely different kind of family. A soul family. Here's our mission at CTK Nampa. Our mission is to create an authentic Christian community that effectively reaches out to unchurched people with love, acceptance, and forgiveness so that they may experience the joy of salvation and a purposeful life of discipleship. That's a beautiful thing. If ever there was something that I could get behind, it would be that. That's our mission. Just like Jesus and his disciples had a mission, this is ours in light of what they did and experienced. But what a bummer if we get so lost in the task at hand, our mission, that we miss the very means that I believe God intends for us to accomplish that mission. Our mission is accomplished when we experience soul friendship and soul family. How fascinating that some of the greatest examples I have in my life of that kind of family are outside of church circles. Now, as a church here, we've been getting some of the best teaching, believe me, of your lifetime on the topic of caring for your soul. I mean, respond to me here. Has this been resonating with anyone? Has this blown your mind on some level at some point, this concept of taking care of your soul? Man, it has for me. But make no mistake, there is one huge, all-encompassing reason that God longs for us to learn to live in a state of caring for our souls. And that is relationship. Relationship with him, relationship with each other. We are not teaching and learning all of these things so that you can become a really, really neat person. Everything that we are doing here is so that you can love God with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your soul, and all of your strength, and love the people around you the same. So the question I have for us then is, are we willing to be open to the prospect of being part of a community of soul families? Because here we sit, and we're not as full as this room gets, but still, if you're like me, you're thinking, this is way too many people to connect to on that level. Like, there's no way. I might as well take off all my clothes right now because it's not happening.